All right, friends. Congratulations. We are finishing week one of our 9-week course. Again, it's an 8 weeks of information, and we have one break week there for Thanksgiving. But we are in lecture 3 of week one. It is October 26th. It is almost spooky day, which is fun. We will have class on spooky day, but if you've got other things, if you've got kiddos or you yourself want to go trick-or-treating, just as a reminder, these are always recorded. So you can do that and have fun. And if you want to show up in a costume, you're welcome to. I don't have prizes or anything, but you're welcome to. That'd be fun too. A little bit of housekeeping. Your discussion questions are due 11:59 PST. Tomorrow I will be, if I haven't received it by tomorrow, I will be sending out a, hey, don't forget that you've got discussion questions. That does not mean that you're in trouble. That does not mean anything. It's just an automated little thing that I'll run it and I'll do a quick check. Does everybody, if you already have your discussion questions, great. And if you don't, then I just send an automated message just as another reminder. I try to remind you, 4 to 5 times a week that, hey, you got discussion questions. Here's what you got done. So that way, none of you guys can say, I didn't know. It's like, yeah, you did, and also just, as we're all busy. So, one extra reminder doesn't hurt. You also have some core assignments. There's 3 of them. We will, by the end of today's class, have covered all the information you're going to need for those. It is Prop It Up, which is what we're going to cover today in props. It is Convert to Arrow and then Predict Destructuring. So those are the 3 ones. We talked about destructuring yesterday in office hour. That video is available on our class sheet. So we have destructuring arrays and objects. We also talked about terminal basics and a GitHub walkthrough by Garrett. So you have all of that office hour stuff available to you. So those are your 3 assignments. We will always teach the material you need for the assignments at least. So those are 3. One thing I did want to let you guys know is not that this changes anything, but I will be out of town or out of office this day on Tuesday. So if you guys are looking for something for me, or if you're looking for, you're trying to make a one-on-one with me or something, I will be out of office. I'll actually be out of office these 2 days. So I will not be here. We will have a guest lecturer. Robert Ponce is awesome. And he's going to come in and teach about lifting state and cred. So it'll be fun. Cool. Great. And again, just as a reminder, we do have this break week for Thanksgiving. So that way, if you guys want to make plans, I did forget, I'll be honest, I forgot to ask about when your guys' stack starts in January, but I will try to remember tomorrow. And Garrett, maybe if you remember to ask Peter, that would also help. ADHD.
Yeah, definitely.
Not do well with the memory, or just shoot me a Slack now and then I can remember it. That'd be great. Okay.
Cool.
A little bit of a recap. Yesterday we talked about what is a single page application. We talked kind of about the power of it. Can anybody tell me, does anybody remember, or you want to put it in chat? What is something that is beneficial about a single page application? Something that is nice. What does it really prevent us from having to do?
Single page applications can prevent us from having to reload the page every single time. So instead, what we could do is we could take out pieces of a page as components and swap them in and out.
Yeah. No, Joseph, that's exactly correct. That's exactly correct. And I see it in the chat as well. Yeah, so it prevents us, it helps us create this in a component based, we call it like the Lego concept too. You can kind of think about it like Legos. Where everything's a component, to where if we just want to change one little thing, we don't have to refresh the entire page. We just have to refresh or change that one piece. And so it really helps us have an efficient and fast application and kind of viewing for our customer, because even today I was on something and it took a little bit to load. I was like, what is going on? Why is this taking a whole 4 seconds to load? So it tries to help us prevent that from happening, which is if you guys were alive during dial-up, then how far we've gotten is insane. But that's a great, perfect explanation of a single page application and what are some advantages of that. We also talked about arrow functions and anonymous functions. We talked about function declarations yesterday. That's going to start coming in handy because we will start using arrow functions really just right now, like as we get into props and as we get into creating props and creating, or sorry, not props per se, but as we start creating our own components, we need to start, dealing with this, and we'll kind of look at how does this single page application work, and really under the hood, you sort of think about it as just a bunch of function calls. That's all we're really doing. And so this is really going to come in handy. So if you're not familiar with arrow functions and anonymous functions, I would really encourage you to go back on the platform. They are there, obviously. We will make sure that we give that to you, but I believe they're in the JavaScript section. Yep, arrow functions here. That is one of your core assignments as well, but I'd really encourage you to get comfortable and just know that we're going to continue to do this, so you'll become more comfortable. So if you're not super comfortable now, that's a-okay. We will get more comfortable in these coming weeks, and you'll be a pro by the end of this. And yesterday, we also did some little Vite kind of action. We created our first Vite project. We're going to do that today. And so for the first couple times, I'm going to keep going through that process of creating a Vite application with you guys. Eventually, once we get to like weeks 4, 5, 6, oftentimes I'll just have that either we'll be continuing something that we built, or I'll have that built because by that time you've already, it's kind of a waste of class time that I could be explaining, or we could be talking or asking questions if I'm doing the same thing over and over that you guys are already familiar with. But we did talk about how there's two ways that we can sort of set up our single page application, our React application. The first one is we could do CRA. Now that is no longer maintained. That's Create React App. It's no longer maintained. So we at Coding Dojo encourage you to not use this, but it is on the platform. And there are a couple things on the platform that are still in reference to Create React App. This is a fairly new switch for us. This is fairly new, like, hey, it's not going to be maintained anymore. And so we moved over to Vite fairly recently. So I'll make sure I kind of try to pinpoint those. Like when we create our components, for example, there's going to be a distinction that you might see on the platform, but with Vite, it's not going to work. So we'll make sure that we do that. But let's go ahead and jump in. We have a couple things that we're doing today. We're going to really talk about what is a component. We're going to create a functional component. So these are kind of tied. We're going to talk about what that is, and then we're going to create one. And then we're going to start passing in props, because you guys have this assignment of, let's see, functional components, of prop it up, where you have to create a person card that accepts the following props, and then we have to display those on the screen. So just like that, we're gonna basically build something very similar. Obviously, I can't do the assignment for you, but I will build something very similar, so that way you guys can kind of deal with that. Cool, great. Okay, awesome. Let's jump in. Are there any questions before we jump in to today's class? Today's class will be, it's a little bit lighter of a class. Want to make sure that we have some understanding and some access to everything. And then I'll leave some time towards the end if there's any questions. So we might not go the full hour, or probably will, but there's a potential chance we don't. If there are any questions about really anything from our housekeeping, our recap, and our agenda, any questions there? Okey-doke. Okay. Let's go ahead and jump in and create our first, let's create a Vite application. So does anybody remember, how would I create a Vite application? If I want to do that here in my lecture 3, anybody remember how I do that? Cool. Thanks, Johnny. Yep. It is npm. So we first navigate to the folder that we want to do that. I'm going to go ahead and just build that within my lecture 3. I'm going to say npm create, and then I say Vite at latest. Perfect. Now it's going to ask me the project name. I'm just going to call this props because that's what we're doing. That's what we're learning. I'm going to use my arrow key to go down and say React. Perfect. And then JavaScript plus SWC. Awesome. So if I ls, I can already see that we now have this folder called props. So we're going to first navigate into that. We're going to change directory. That's what CD stands for. Let's change directory into props. ls. Cool. Now I'm about to run npm install, or you can run npm I. They do the same thing. But does anybody remember which file, whenever I run npm install, what file does it look at? And what file basically says, here's all of my dependencies, or here's all the dependencies that we need and we need to install. Anybody remember? Talked about it yesterday. Yeah, exactly, Johnny. It's your package JSON, right? This file, let's see if we already have it here. So this file, this package JSON says, hey, here's everything that we're going to need. Cool. Good job. So I am in props. We've CD'd in. I say npm I. That's going to look at my package JSON file, and then it's going to install everything that I need. npm install also works, or npm I if you're lazy. Cool. So now if I look here, we have this new folder called node modules. Now, does anybody remember if I wanted to delete node modules? Let's say I was going to zip this up and send it. What was the thing that I can use to delete? Does anybody know? This is like advanced level. If you remember it, then you got a real good memory. Yeah. Yep. So I can do rm, rf, node modules. Now, if I say ls again, it's no longer there. So I can just run npm I. I can do this as many times as I want, and everything is going to be a-okay. Great job, guys. Cool. And then the last thing I need to do is I need to say npm run dev. npm run dev. And that's going to actually start my server. Now, I don't have to do that right now. If we wanted to like look at this and do some stuff, that's fine. I'm going to go ahead and do it, but let's go ahead and cool. So we're here, we're at localhost 5173. I come here. Great. I've got my application, my server's up and running. We are good to go. We officially created our second Vite project within this course. Awesome. Okay. So let's look at this code a little bit. And remember, we talked about how there's a couple things going on. And really looking at this, here is my index file. Here's my document. And if you remember, we talked about how in React, we have our DOM, and then it creates what we call a virtual DOM, and it's going to check and say, are there changes, are there differences? And it will then update the DOM if necessary. Here is the div that this is where our entire React sort of application is going to live, right? Or not React application, sorry. Here's where our entire JSX, all of our information is going to live right here in this ID root. Do you need to know that? No. Just know that just don't go in and delete this, or else nothing's going to show up. But really, in theory, this doesn't change. We just are going to affect this div right here. That's how a single page application works. Now, the file that directs that is, okay, we have our HTML with an ID root. Awesome. Then we have this main JSX. Now, what this main JSX is doing is in the platform, it talks about like your first, like your first React file. I think it's like a first React. And you see that there is some DOM manipulation where we render certain things and we get elements by ID. And it's kind of doing some heavy work, but we're using React in a way with some vanilla JavaScript to call React elements or to do different things to affect the DOM. Now, Vite, thankfully, creates it to where we don't have to kind of worry about that. Here, we are still doing that. We're creating root where we're doing document get element by ID root. So it's going here. It's getting this element right here. And then what we're saying we want to do is we want to render this information. Now, it is important to note that this right here is this app.jsx. It's this application right here. right here. So if let's hypothetically, let's say that this was called unicorn.jsx. This right here would be called unicorn.jsx. Do not rename it. Keep it as app. But just know that that is what this is doing. And because this is in strict mode, when we see components, there's a dev tool that we'll download. It usually will do it twice, and that's because we're in strict mode here. But that's just by default, and that's a-okay. We don't need to change that. You don't need to mess with that. That's really kind of from a low level what's going on. Do you need to know all this? Absolutely not. But I just wanted to, the more you know, the more you kind of have control. And so when something breaks, this shouldn't break, this won't break, this won't break. But it's good to sort of know what is causing your application to look a certain way or to show and reflect something. So here's our HTML. It goes and this renders this app, which is my component. And so this is all of my information here, right? Now, I'm going to delete everything except these. Does anybody know what this is called here? Anybody know? This is what we call a fragment. And so in React, you don't have to have an actual element. This is just a fragment. So you don't need to have like an H1 or a div. Now you could call this div if you wanted. That'd be a-okay. But you don't need to. It can be a fragment and that works perfectly fine. Can I have multiple fragments? Anybody remember? Can I have multiple or elements if I have a div right here? Is that going to work? Nope. Nope. Right? Just as a reminder, components have to have just one parent. So we can have this fragment, or it can be a div, or it could be a nav. It could be whatever we want. It just can be one, and it can't have any siblings at all. Cool. Okay. So if we're looking at this, this is a function called app, right? And at the end of the day, when we're breaking everything down and we have all these separate components, and if you remember, I created a kind of like a little box. I'll do it real quickly. I created a little box like this, and then we had talked about how we can have multiple components that maybe is here and here and here, right? And that one HTML just gets changed. And so if we have like another component over here, we can swap them in and out. That's the whole power of this. From a fundamental level, all a component is a function. It's just a function call. So you can sort of think about it as simply a function call. So we're going to create our first component. And we're going to kind of get started with our functional components and kind of creating our first things. So that's going to be fun. So here we're starting. We're very basic, very simple. We shouldn't have anything. Yep, there's nothing there because we aren't rendering anything. But I'm going to create my first component. We're just going to create a nav bar. So first what we're going to do is we're going to go into source, and then we're going to create a new folder called components. Perfect. Now within this, we're going to create a new file, and I'm going to call this nav.jsx. Now, one thing to note, there's two things to note. The component name needs to be a capital. So if you have it as nav, then we need to create it as a capital N, nav. And the second thing is that because we're using Vite, this has to be a JSX. I had spoken about how there's a couple different things that are different between CRA and Vite. With Create React App, it could be a JS file. And I don't know, let's see if it, and I think on the platform, it shows it as a JS file. Yeah, so see how it says app.js? That was back when we were using Create React App and it allowed it to do that. We still do JSX because it is a little bit easier for us. But if you see this JS, if you're using Create React App, then that means that your component can be of the type of JS. If you're using Vite like me, it must be a JSX. So that is just one thing to make sure that you know. And so, yeah, great. So we have our first component created. Now, what I would say is go in here, and then there's going to be an ES7. and it is this guy right here, this ES7 React React Native snippets is what it stands for. I don't know why. Yeah, snippets. And so I would encourage you to download this. It's going to make your life much, much easier. And so again, you want to check and make sure this has 983. This is also using GraphQL. We don't necessarily need that. Whereas this one has 9.7 million. Stick with this guy. Download this and enable it because it's going to really save you some time. So now, because we have those snippets created, right, I can do something like RAFCE. And this is going to create a React arrow function export component. And we're going to talk about all this here in just a second. Cool. If we look at our original application or our original app component, right, there's a couple things it has. It has a name, it has a return, and it's got an export. This is a normal function. Here, if we do RAFCE, then what that will do is that'll create an arrow function for us that's called nav. So it'll actually take in the name of that, which is really nice. Name of our component. It'll create the return for us, and it'll also export. Those are sort of the big three things that you need. Do you have to make it an arrow function? No, you do not. You can do it as a normal function just like this if you want, as long as you have those main components. You have an export, you have a return, and you have a function name. And the name must map with or must be whatever your JSX file or your component is. Whatever your component is called, that's what the name must be, right? So again, all we're doing is creating a function. That's it. And I put that shortcut in there as well. And so that's RAFCE. Now there is other ones. I think RFC is one. So this is sort of the same thing. So it's a different way though. Our export is at the top. So this is another way you could do it. Fundamentally, they're going to work the exact same. It does not matter. I like to do RAFCE. I just do. This is how I learned, and this is what I like. There's no rhyme or reason. But I like using arrow functions when I can. Okay. One thing to note too, that if you're using React 17 or better, you actually don't need this. So if you didn't have this import React from React, it's by default, or with the snippet it comes in. But if I didn't have that, it's going to work just fine. So again, the main things are your actual function name, you have a return statement, and you have an export here. Cool. Now, what I want to do is let's actually create nav. And then maybe I've got an H1 that says, hello world. Perfect. Great. So what my function call is doing, and so when I call my function, it is returning, and remember, anytime we have a function call, that function call becomes whatever that function returns. And so what we're returning is an element of nav with an H1 of hello world. Cool. So our function itself is created, but I now need to do my function call. So all I have to do is type nav here. Now, notice what happens. This is by default going to pop up, and it should pop up. And then I can click on it and see how it says this dot components. Perfect. That's great, because in order for us to grab that function and grab that component, we have to import it. So if you ever are building and you have it and you're calling your component here and you're like, why on earth is it not showing up? Always make sure that it's imported. Now, did you have to do that shortcut? No, you could type this out. Absolutely. You just say import the component name from /components, right? Because they're on the same level, components and app. So it's saying, hey, from this level, go into my components folder. Within my components folder, there should be a component called nav, right? Which there is. if this was higher up, let's say that app JSX was one more in, we would have to navigate accordingly. We don't have to now, but you would have to make sure that that could be part of your pathway issue as well. But now we're actually calling nav. So what's happening is if I go to my actual code, we should see hello world. Hello world. So we've created our first component, right? Vite is running. It's saying, hey, I've got an HTML. Cool. At this div root, I want to do something. What do I want to do? I want to create, or I want to render app. So it's saying, okay, app, what do you want me to do? And it's saying, hey, go bring my component. Go bring my component of nav, or basically here's my function call. And it says, okay, great. It comes and it runs this function. It gets back this element right here, or this information. And it says, okay, let's place that right here. So even if I look at this and I inspect, oh yeah, I don't need that over. And I look at my body. Within my body, I've got my div of root, right? That's what's being affected. And then you see that it injects right here this nav with hello world. So it's pulling in my component and all of my information as well. Perfect. Brittany said, should the components folder be in the assets folder? I think it's on the same level. Garrett, it doesn't need to be in assets, right? No, I think you can be on the same level. Working now.
Yep, you're good. Right
Yeah.
there where you have it.
Yep. That's what I thought. So yeah, nope, it's good right here, as long as it's within my source. So cool. Yeah, of course. Okay. Any questions on us creating our first component and running our component? Any thoughts on this or any questions inherently from this? Just put a 1 in the chat if this all makes sense, put a 0 if it does not. Somebody said, should we put import? Great question. Should we put import React from React in the app.jsx? So remember, if we're using React 17 or better, which is what we are, this is actually deprecated. So this is because I did the snippet. This is from back in the day. You needed to have this, and the snippet just hasn't been updated because it doesn't break anything. And especially if people are still, not everybody moved up to 17, right? And so it doesn't break anything if you're 17 or better. But if you are less than 17, then it wouldn't. It would break things, so it keeps it here. So no, we don't need to put this. We actually don't need this. If I deleted it, it works the exact same. So if I come here and I refresh, it works the exact same. That's just because the snippet gave that to us, but we don't need it. Great question though. And right now we're not using state. We're not using the React logo. We're not using any of that. So we can actually delete all of that. And right now we are using CSS, but if we didn't want to use the CSS, we actually don't need to import that either. So awesome. Okay, now let's hypothetically say that instead of saying hello world, I wanted to say hello Garrett, or hello Will, or hello somebody else. Can anybody think about maybe one way that we could kind of build that out? Any thoughts on what we could do?
We could have a parameter after hello, that,
Yeah.
and we create a function where the user can pass through,
Yeah.
or we could pass through the whatever name we want.
Yeah, Joseph, you're exactly right. We can pass, because these are functions, right? And functions give us access to parameters, right? If our function, this is all just a function call. And if we were saying, hey, we want this function to have access to maybe a name, what we can do is maybe we want to give it a name. we just pass it a parameter. Now, what we call it in React is a prop, but you sort of think about it, it's just a parameter, right? And so first, what I'm going to say is first name. Oh my goodness. Sorry, guys. Equals will. Perfect. Now, please note that this component here, so this is my component call. It is self-closing. So we put it within the actual call itself. So this is us saying, hey, we want my function to have access to this piece of information here. Cool. Now, in the same way that if I pass an argument into a function, what does my function need to have? What does it need to be able to accept? Yeah, exactly, Brittany. A parameter, right? Now, we don't call it, normally whenever you have a function call, you can call the parameter anything you want. It's a little bit different with React where we can't do that. We have to call it a specific name, and that name is props. Oops. Props. Cool. Now, with us calling it props, we're saying, hey, we are expecting some information. Now, first off, before we get sort of crazy with it, I'm just going to console log props. And let's save this. And so when we come here, and I refresh, and I go to the console, I get this first name, Will, right? It's saying, hey, this is the information I have access to. Now, remember, the reason it's coming in twice is because we have it on strict mode. I don't know why strict mode does that, but that's the reason why it's showing twice. But we have access to this. Now, what this tells me, and something that we should know, is props is an object, right? Props is always an object that is taken in by the component. And so it is given a key value pair. So with the key of first name and then the value of will, right? Or whatever the name that we pass in. So props is an object, and it is by key value pairs. Cool. So now that we've console logged that rules, we can actually go into my code and I can grab information. Now, we talked about how we, use backticks when we're dealing with strings. We don't have to do that here. Like if we want to just grab that information, we don't have to do that here. We don't have to do a backtick and then a $sign. All I have to do is say props dot, user, or I called this first name. Right? Remember, my key is first name. So I'm saying, hey, in my object of props, I want to call the key a first name, and it's going to give me back Will. So now if I come here and I refresh, I get hello Will. So I've officially passed in the prop of Will. If I wanted to say Garrett, I save, we go back, hello Garrett. So my props really is just being passed in, and it now can be used to be shown on within my component. Now let's say I had a second thing. I'll go back to Will. So I add in my last name. I can do the same thing, props dot last name. And if I come back here, hello Will Calhoun. Because now my props has access, it's an object to a key value pair of Will Calhoun. I'm going to pause there. Are there any questions? I'm going to show you a way that we can actually make this code look a little bit nicer. But are there any questions right here? Or is this making sense? Put a 1 in the chat if this makes tons of sense. Put a 0 if you are super lost. Perfect. Okay, some ones. Now, we learned a tool yesterday in office hour to kind of if I didn't want to always put props because that feels a little repetitive. We've figured out a way that we could actually extract information from objects and from arrays. Does anybody remember what that was?
Is it destructuring?
Absolutely, Brittany, it is. So we can destructure, right? Brittany, I'm gonna put you on the spot. My wife would kill me because she would get cold called. She gets cold called at law school, and she once heard me do that and like be like, "All right, what do you think, Brittany?" She was like, "How dare you? I never thought I'd marry a man who cold called people." So if you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. Just be like, "Nope, I don't want to do that." But if you do, how could I do that?
So you would put const, and then I think the curly brackets,
Yeah.
and
Pretty
then
good,
first
actually.
name, last name, props.
Yep. Perfect. Sorry, GitHub Copilot gave it to me. But yes, that's exactly right. Right? I say const, and I'm actually extracting my first name and my last name. Those are my keys within that. So notice whatever I name it here is what is referred to here. So that's sometimes where people get messed up. They might just call this like F name, and then here they call it first name. And then it gets confused, right? Because it's saying I don't have a key of first name, I have a key of F name. So I can destructure, and then I actually just have to get rid of this props. Moving forward, I will always do this way. I think that this looks way nicer, makes it look just make more sense. But if I come here and refresh, it does the same thing. It works just fine. We just have destructured from our object of props. We created two values of first name and last name. And so I can say hello, first name, last name. Cool. Any questions on this? Okay. Well, let's go ahead and create a second component, just so we can see how this works. So I'm going to go into my components folder. I'm going to add a file. I'm going to say movie.jsx. I'm going to say RAFCE. Cool. It creates that for me. And then let's say that I just want to do something like, I want to say movie title. And then I want to say maybe release year or H2 or release RELEASE year. And then maybe genre. Perfect. Cool. So I have this information here. Let me come back and give it that. Perfect. Now I want to create, I want to call my component, right? So I need to say movie. When I do this, I'm going to go ahead and do that because I need to make sure that it imports, right? It's self-closing. But maybe I want to pass in a movie. Does anybody want to give me their favorite movie of all time?
Nacho Libre.
Nacho Libre, let's go. Love Nacho Libre. I love it. When he does the chips and they're fighting over it, it's so funny. Nacho Libre. Let's see. Does anybody know the release year? If not, I'll just make it up.
I think it's 2003.
2003? Perfect.
I was gonna
Weirdly,
go
I was thinking it might be
2001. That sounds better.
And then let's say genre is comedy. Perfect. Great. So I've passed that in. Because I passed that in, what does my function need? Because I'm passing in some information. I have an argument. What does my function need? I've given it some arguments. If we're looking at nav as kind of a guide, what do we need to pass in? Yep, I
The
see it in the chat.
parameter of props.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Props. Now, remember, if we just have one thing for, if we just have one thing for, as an argument within an arrow function, you actually don't need the parenthesis. You can have it. It's not going to break anything. But if you're just passing in one thing, which is props, then you don't need it. So cool. Now let's go ahead and destructure this. Now, one thing to note is when you destructure and when we get to state and when we start kind of dealing with some, manipulation and taking in stuff, you always want to do that before your return statement. So you don't want to do that during your return statement. It gets really weird because it's like, wait, I'm confused. Sorry. So we do it before our return statement. So I come here and it already has it. Good old GitHub Copilot says const title, release year, genre. It's pulling in from title, release year, genre. It is destructuring them. So I can say something like this. Title. Oops. Release year. And genre. Perfect. Great. So now if I come here and I look at my code, we have our movie title, our release year, and our genre. Now, what's nice about this, and this is where components really come in handy, because right now we have two separate components, and you're like, okay, we have two different things. But once I create a component, if it's going to act the exact same, I can just do another one. Somebody else want to give me their favorite movie?
Lord of the Rings.
Lord of the Rings.
Ooh, go Brittany.
Brittany, what's the release year there?
Not a
Ooh.
clue.
I think I want to go with 2001 or like,
Okay, we'll go 2001.
it was right there.
And would this be considered action or what do you think? Lord of the Rings rules, but
Adventure?
adventure. I like adventure. That makes sense. They're on an adventure. So now if I look, it already shows up in the same way. And so this is what we call like a reusable component, right? I just have to say the component name, but since I built it once, given that it's not going to be any different, right? We're sort of just showing a movie. Because it's not any different, I don't have to do something separately. So if I have a bunch of components, right, or if I have a component that I'm going to use in a bunch of different places, what's really nice about that is I only have to define it once. And then everywhere I call the component, it just is going to go back to this. So if I ever want to change it, let's say I wanted to add in some information, like let's say I wanted to add in Oscars. Like, did it get any Oscars? I don't know if that's a good. We'll say rating. Add in rating here. Perfect. And then I need to add in a rating here. Do that.
What would happen if only one of them had a rating? Would you have to make a whole different component?
Well, you would probably just pass in like NA. And then or you could have some logic that up here that said like, hey, if rating is, you could either have some like information that you could pass in. So maybe you have like a default value, or you could look and then say, hey, if rating would still be there, if it equals like a null or undefined, then we, have logic that we don't show this. So you could kind of manipulate it that way to still have that logic within your component. And it can kind of hit both edge cases. Now, if you find yourself, having to write a bunch of different code for a whole bunch of different use cases, I guess that's where you would sit and say, does having one component make sense, right? Or is there some separate, like, are these two distinct things? So it's kind of up to you there. But now we've got, let's say that this is out of 3. So that way I don't offend anybody. Usually I'd say scale of 1 to 3 anyway. So there you go, 3 being the best. So now, what's nice about it is, again, I just have to change it and show that. Or let's say I didn't want to show rating. I no longer wanted to show rating anymore. I can still pass that information. I still have access to it. I'm just not using it, right? And what's nice about these reusable components is that instead of having to go in multiple different areas, like on an HTML file, if you have like, if we had this, right, on different places, I'd have to go change it everywhere, right? And if you get this monolithic, huge application, oftentimes that are hundreds of thousands of lines of code, that can be really challenging and a lot to do. Whereas, again, part of the real big benefit of functional components or single page applications is that I just have to go in here and change it. Let's say I just wanted to just change it to this. You know, then all of a sudden it affects all of them. And so wherever, let's say wherever within my application, I want to, I call this component, it's going to be changed because I'm actually fundamentally changing the component, not just a piece every, you know, every which way. Cool. Johnny asks, can you use default values in props? I don't think so. I don't think you can, because this is just destructuring from the object that is passed in. So you could have a default value here, right? Again, you could have it like, or, you know, when you're calling or you're submitting a form, really is how you would communicate. You would maybe have a default value. If they don't put a rating, you can default that to NA or something like that, and it still passes that information. Typically within development, we don't, we handle one case, right? And so even if somebody doesn't give us a rating, we say, okay, NA, right? We don't just change it to like, if the rating was there or if it wasn't there, we can say, you know, if it's NA, then skip it, that's fine, or just put it NA. But we don't want to handle every edge case, right? We want to kind of, you can think about development as we're sort of sheep herding or cattle, kind of like cattle driving our users to do and give us the correct information or the correct data as much as we can, whether that's through hidden form inputs, whether that's through default values of, hey, if this is being passed in and they don't do anything and this wasn't required, let's just put NA or it's empty or that equals, you know, null, something like that. And then we can check and say, hey, if this is null, then don't worry about it. Else, you know, you'll be okay. But this right here is just doing JavaScript. So if I were to say something like, you know, h4 random info, and I said something like 5 plus 5. This is us just injecting JavaScript in here. And so this will just say random info 10. But it does that mathematics for me. So you don't just have to put props here, right? We have access to different JavaScript tools. And it will do that math. It'll kind of render that as JavaScript. But really the whole point of today is that we look at props, right? And we say, okay, how do I pass this information to you? And how does this work? Cool. Are there any questions? We've got 11 minutes. I've kind of hit everything I wanted to talk about today. So I want to reserve 10 minutes to really ask, are there any questions? Is there anything that you guys need help with when it comes to this, when it comes to props?
Could you show us how you'd like connect a CSS file and kind of like move those different components around?
Yes, we can. It's not necessarily like when we get down to styles here, that's where it's going to kind of come in handy. So I'd say it's a little bit ahead of schedule. So we're going to get to styling here a little bit later on. So, but it is here on the platform. whether you want to do inline styling or nothing. Really, all we're doing here right now is we have a styling. Oops, right here. We have a styling, right? To where we've got a background that is black. We've got text as white. And that is where we would have, but that is all coming from this app CSS and this index CSS. But styling is like a next week thing. So I don't want to jump ahead too far, but yes, we'll talk about that for sure.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Can you
Anybody
talk
have- Go ahead.
Yeah, I guess I do have one question. The relationship between using, I guess, like the variables for the props on the right page versus using them within a constant versus using them in the H2 tag. They all need to be exactly the same because they're all referencing the same thing. It's not like they're referencing different things.
Yeah, exactly. So remember, this sends an object to our function. So if I console log, console.log props, and I inspect, look at my console, I have this object here, and it has all this information. So this front, you can sort of think about it as this side is sending an object to my component. My component says, okay, great. I have access to that now. I have that object. I've received it. Here we're destructuring. And remember, when we're destructuring, we're just grabbing the key name of my object. And so if I wanted to call this something different, if I want to call this like movie title, I could do that. To where then in here, I could have, I could have it like this. And that would work just fine. Still have that. This is me taking that object value, but I'm redefining the variable name. So let's say I already had something to do with title. I could do this as well, right? And say, hey, destructure this object of props. I know that there's a key of title. Let me get that value, but refer to it as this movie title here. Now that's not necessary for what we're doing, but it is possible. But yes, you're exactly right. This is being passed over as an object. We're taking these are my key names that were passed over. And then we're referring to those keys here. Like I said, we can change these key names if we need to, in the same way that just by doing a colon and then, you know, movie. You said movie, let's just say movie. It's fine. We can just go to movie. We could do that if we wanted. If we needed to, we could do that. But yeah, this is just referring to the key that's passed by this object, or that was passed in. This refers to the key, and then this refers to our destructuring. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Are there any other questions on this guy? On props? That should absolutely kind of set you up for your props assignment. Prop it up, really where you have to create a component called person card. Remember, components must be capital. That accepts the following props: first name, last name, age, hair color. You display 4 of them, show 4 different people. And so in the same way that we have multiple movies, let me get rid of this. Where we have multiple movies, you're just going to have multiple person cards. So you create one component called person card that has the information we need, and then you just display that 4 times. Are there any other questions? Okay. Well, I will give you guys 5 minutes back then. If you guys need anything, obviously we're available on Discord. Good luck and for this weekend and on your assignments. Please don't forget that they are due by Sunday, 11:59 p.m. Pacific time. And don't forget about your discussion questions, and I'll send an update there. But other than that, that's all I have, friends. And I hope you have a wonderful night and a good weekend.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.